Hi everyone, it's Alice, and today I thought I would do a kind of favorites video where I talk about some of my favorite books that I very rarely mention on this channel because they just don't come up as much, but I still love them. I don't always know why this happens. Like sometimes I read a book, I love it, and I will not stop talking about it, like I mention it in every video. And then sometimes I read a book, love it, and just never talk about it again. I think maybe it has something to do with like the types of recommendation videos that I do. Like sometimes it just doesn't fit in. And this is the problem with reading a lot of different things because my reading taste is like all over the place. And sometimes I just don't know where to fit in some of the books that I love. Some of them are also older favorites, which is maybe why I don't always remember to include them, but I feel like these books deserve a little bit more love, so that's why we're making this video. And I'm just gonna go through my pile and we'll start at the top with a fantasy book. It's The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. I do actually partly know why I don't talk about this book as much. This is actually one of my favorite fantasy books that I've ever read. Like, it's so good, but it is the first book in an unfinished trilogy. So the first and the second book is out, and I and a lot of other people have been waiting for the third and last one for something crazy like 15 years or something, and it appears it is still nowhere in sight. It's been a good long while since I read this book as well, but I remember absolutely loving it. It's about this man who's magically gifted and he becomes legendary, and the story starts off with him telling his story about his childhood when he was an orphan, and he eventually gets into this super prestigious magic school, and he's had a whole big life with a lot of adventures and a lot of stuff in it, and the books just tell the story about that. And I love those kinds of books. I think the fantasy world is also great in here, and I especially loved the part where he's at the school, which makes a lot of sense to me because I love a school setting. I also remember when I read this book that even though it's a fantasy book, it felt like weirdly realistic, which maybe doesn't make a lot of sense, but I think it's because within the bounds of this world, it feels realistic because the main character doesn't always like succeed and doesn't always go through everything unscathed. And I really enjoyed that. I really should reread this book. I have waited to reread it because I'm just waiting for the last book, but I think I will get gray hair before that time comes, so I really should just reread it now. Then I have a couple of literary fiction books, the first one being The Unseen World by Liz Moore. And I really like this author. I've liked everything that I've read by her. I think my favorite is probably The God of the Woods. This is one of her earlier works though, and even though it is quite different than her other books, like the characters and the writing in here I thought was excellent. The story follows a girl who is raised by a single father, and this dad is brilliant and he works at this computer science lab in the 80s when the main character is growing up, and the main character is homeschooled and goes with her father to work every day, and she's kind of like a prodigy. Then the dad's memory starts failing, and the story is about the main character realizing that she maybe doesn't know that much about her dad's past and he actually has a lot of secrets. So the book is a lot about her trying to figure out who he really was and what is in his past. And that like discovery process goes all the way into her adulthood. It's a really captivating coming of age story, and I especially loved the exploration of the relationship between the dad and the daughter in here. And I do just love this author's writing style and the way she crafts characters. I just think the characters in her books are always very interesting. I actually think that this would be very interesting to reread now with the rise of AI, because that also pops up in here in quite an interesting way. The second one is Tin Man by Sarah Winman, and this is one of those books that is very difficult to capture in just a few sentences, but if you like character-driven novels, this is a great one. The story revolves around two men who became friends quite young, and they were very close, and so close that that friendship eventually evolved into something more. But then we jump ahead in time. It's been like a decade, and one of the men is married to a woman and the other one is nowhere to be found. And the story is all about the two of them and their lives and like what happened in between that time. I remember this book felt like a gut punch, but in the best possible way. And I think this author's writing style is just so good. The way she crafts characters is great. And this is quite short, but it really packs a punch. And it brings to life a very vivid story. Next, we have a mystery novel. It's The Lost Man by Jane Harper. And I think the reason I don't talk about this as much is because it has kind of like a summery setting, or at least it's set in a hot climate. And I feel like whenever I recommend mystery novels, I very often like lean towards that like dark and gothic and autumn and winter, and this doesn't really fit into that, but it is one of the best mysteries that I've ever read, and it's so atmospheric, so I really should talk about it more. This is one of those mysteries that lean kind of literary, and it's more character focused. The story is set in the Australian outback, in this place where the sun is unrelenting and it's kind of desolate, and there is a man who has died out there, but he has lived there his whole life, so it seems a little strange that he died, because he's one of those people who would know how to survive out there and also not get in that situation at all. So that raises some questions about what actually happened to him and whether or not it was an accident. This author is one of my favorite mystery writers, and I think what she does so well is the atmosphere. Like, all of the books that I've read by her bring to life the setting through the atmosphere so well, and it really transports you, and it feels so vivid but also dark and really tense, and it's just so good. Then we have quite a few historical fiction books, like Along Petal of the Sea by Isabel Allende, and I read this a few years ago and I just absolutely loved it. The thing with this is that I find it so hard to summarize this book in a way that makes it sound as good as it actually is. But it starts off in the 1930s in Spain, when civil war has broken out, and we follow these characters through generations. It's kind of like a sweeping novel, like it spans over a long period of time, but we follow these two characters from the time in Spain until they end up in Chile, and it's just so good. And again, if you like character-driven novels, this is excellent. I also really like this author's writing. I think the way she creates characters makes them feel real. We also have Burial Rites by Hannah Kent, and as you can see, I don't have a physical copy of this book, and I actually think that is the reason why I don't recommend it as much, because whenever I peruse my shelves to find books to recommend to you all, it's not there, so I don't have that physical copy of it. I actually don't remember what happened to the one that I had, but I should repurchase it because this book is so good and I would like to talk about it more, and it also does fit into that like dark and gothic kind of vibe. This one is set in Iceland in 1829, and it follows a woman who has been convicted of the murder of her former master, and she is awaiting her execution, and she's sent to this desolate farm in the middle of nowhere to wait, and she has to live there with the family of the farm, and they don't like having her there, but eventually throughout the book they get to know each other a little bit, and she also talks to this reverend, and through that we get to know her story and what actually happened. This one is also super atmospheric, so if you like that, this is an excellent one. And I actually feel like all of the books that I've read, well, all of them, the two books that I've read by this author are both very atmospheric. The other one is The Good People. That's a really good one as well. I do have a copy of that, but I don't talk about it as much as I should. Then we have a really underrated one that I never really hear anyone talk about. It's Sometimes a River Song by Avril Joy. This is set in a riverboat community in Arkansas in the 1930s, and we meet this girl whose life is marked by poverty, violence, and patriarchal traditions. And this is her coming of age story, and a part of the story is about her wanting to learn how to read because she feels like that might give her some freedom, and it's just about her life and what happens to her and her struggle to survive. I do occasionally recommend this book because I think it's really good, but I actually think the reason I don't talk about this as much is that the writing in here is very particular. The main character has like a sort of dialect, and it's written the way that she thinks and speaks. And so that writing style I don't think is for everyone, and I remember it took me a little bit of time to get into it. But if you can get into it, this is really really good. And it's a really moving and vivid coming of age story, and yeah, I've never heard anyone talk about this book, but it really is very good. But it is like a little unique, so it's not for everyone. Next, we have The Color Purple by Alice Walker. And I read this only like 1 or 2 years ago, so I was really late to the party on this one. And I think that's the reason why I don't talk about it as much, because it just feels like one of those books that everyone has read and loved. That's probably incorrect, but yeah, I read this a few years ago and I thought it was amazing. The story starts off in the 1900s and it's written through all of these letters, and the story revolves around these two sisters whose lives take very different directions. And again, this is one of those books that's very difficult to summarize, but I feel like there is a reason why this is so well known. It's because it is excellent. I really love the themes of sisterhood in here, which shows up in the story in more ways than one. And it was a sad and brutal read, but it's also one of those books where I feel like once you've read it, you will never be able to forget it because it really is that good. Moving on, we have a couple of dystopian books, and I love a good dystopian book. So we have Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel, and I read this when it was at its like height of popularity around the time when it came out. And everyone was talking about this book, and this is why I think maybe I don't talk about it as much, because again, I sort of just assume that everyone has heard about this and or read it. The story in here is post-apocalyptic, so it's set after the collapse of society, and we follow a group of actors who travel around an area of what's left of North America. And this is again one of those books that's very hard to summarize because there is a lot that goes on in this book, and it sort of flips back and forward between after the collapse and before, and it's about art but also survival, and you just gotta read it. It's very hard to describe. This is another one that I really should reread because it's been quite a few years now, and it is one of those dystopian books that leans more literary. The next one is actually The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins, and this is a book that I actually don't know if I've ever mentioned on this channel because I read this a long time ago, and I don't really read a lot of YA anymore or recommend a lot of YA books, but this is one of those books where I feel like this is just as great for adults. I'm sure we all know what this is about, but if you don't, this is set in a dystopian society where we have 12 districts that are all ruled by the capital, and the capital every year arrange the Hunger Games where kids and teenagers from each district have to go into an arena and fight to the death, and this is how the capital sort of keeps everyone in line. That's not what they say it is, but that is what it is. And I think the political and societal commentary in here is just really good because there's a lot more to it than that, and I just think it's a very interesting and thought-provoking story. I'm really due a reread of this entire trilogy, and I'm excited to read these books at the age I'm at now because I think these are the kinds of books that you can get something different from depending on what age you are and like what you know in your life experience. That is why I think these books fit both younger people and adults. They are really brutal though, at least from what I remember, but also really good. Then we have a classic that I really love. It's They Were Sisters by Dorothy Whipple. And I do mention this from time to time, but I don't think I talk about it as much as I should because I feel like this is really underrated. You might know I love a good book about sisters, and in here we meet three of them who end up marrying very different men, and because of that they end up with very different lives, and the story is just about them. It's very slice of life, but I really enjoyed it, and I really enjoyed this author's writing style and the way that she crafts character. This book is published by Persephone Books, and I should actually talk about them more as well because they republish forgotten and neglected books, mostly by women. My favorite discovery that I have found in their library is Dorothy Whipple. I think I've read 4 out of her 6 books, and I really enjoy them. I think this is probably my favorite, but I really like all of them. Lastly, we have several nonfiction books, and I think the reason that I don't talk about these as much is that I just don't talk about a lot of nonfiction on here. I do try to squeeze them in wherever they fit, so they do pop up from time to time because I do really love them. The first one I have is The Spy and the Traitor by Ben Macintyre, which I do have a physical copy of. I just don't have it here because I've lent it to a friend. But this is a biography about a KGB agent who turned spy for the British during the Cold War and gave the West a very valuable look behind the Iron Curtain. I mean, if you're not interested in this time period or like that summary of the book, it may sound really boring, but what makes this book so good is exactly how not boring it is. There's something about the way this author writes that like blends history and all of these facts with like the way he writes the narrative in a way makes it feel like a story, because that is also what it is, but it makes it like very engaging to read. And I think this person, like this guy, is very interesting. He's not always that likable and he's a little weird, but he has a very interesting story, and like everything that happened with him and all of that is just fascinating, and the way that it's presented actually makes it very exciting to read. The second one is probably my favorite memoir. It's Know My Name by Chanel Miller, and this is actually one of the best books that I have ever read, so it is kind of beyond me why I don't talk about this as much, but again, I think it's just because I don't talk about nonfiction as much as I do fiction. But my god, this book is so good. Like, it's just so good. It tells the story of the author who was sexually assaulted on a Stanford campus, and that case got really big, and she wrote an impact statement. I think that's what it's called, victim impact statement, that went viral, but for a long time she was just known as Jane Doe, and this book is her reclaiming her name and reclaiming her story. I almost can't describe how impactful this book is. I do think that Chanel Miller is just an excellent writer, and this felt brutal and sad and intimate and personal, and you just feel like you're there in her head in a way, and it's very emotional. It made me very emotional to read. It almost makes me emotional just to talk about it, but it really is as good as everyone says it is. Like, it's 100% worth the read, even though it is a little bit difficult to read at times. It is so worth it. The last two books that I have for today, I think I just don't talk about as much because they're kind of like niche, but I really love them. So we have Over the Edge of the World by Laurence Bergreen, and I do mention this book occasionally. Sometimes I will like squeeze it into a recommendation video where I talk about adventure books, because even though this is nonfiction, it does fit into that quite nicely. I've read this book twice and enjoyed it equally both times. I just think it's such a good story. It's all about Ferdinand Magellan and his circumnavigation of the globe in the 16th century, which is the first time anyone has done that, at least that we are aware of. And I just love the adventure aspect of this, the history aspect, and I like this period of history with like exploration of the world and all of that. I just love it. This is also written in a really accessible way, and it's actually one of the first nonfiction books that I read as an adult, and I feel like this is the book, or I know that this is the book that opened my eyes to nonfiction, because before I read this, I thought I didn't like nonfiction, which is a little crazy, but this really opened the door for me, and I think because of that, it will always have a special place in my heart. That is also one of the reasons why I wanted to reread this, because I'm like, is it as good as I remember? But it really was. The last one is one that you're just gonna have to take my word for it, because I realize this seems like a weird thing to read about, but this really is very good. It's The Feather Thief by Kirk Wallace Johnson, and this revolves around this heist in 2009 where this guy broke into a natural history museum and stole 300, a little under 300 rare bird specimens. And why did he do this? He did it to make fishing flies and like sell the feathers to other people who want to make fishing flies. And this is, I think, where I lose some people, but just trust me, I have no interest in fly fishing. I have no interest at all in like the feather part of that. I have some interest in birds, like my interest in birds is growing, but even though I have no interest in fishing or like that part of it, This was just fascinating. The heist part, I do think a lot of people could get into because there's like a mystery around that. But there is also just a lot of other stuff. This book is about obsession and history and nature and the preservation of nature. And there's so much in here. And I realize it's a hard sell. But I can tell you that some watchers of this channel have read this book because I recommended it and loved it. I've never like been told, maybe just because they didn't tell me, but I've never been told that someone read this because of me and didn't like it. But then I also feel like maybe you're a particular kind of person if you take this recommendation. But like it is kind of like true crime, and I think if you're the kind of reader or the kind of person that I am who's generally curious about a lot of different things, and if it's done well and presented in an engaging way, most things are interesting. If you're that kind of person, I do think you could really like this because it really is like very good, even though it sounds weird. That was the last book in my stack, though. Those were all of my favorites that I very rarely talk about, at least that I could think of for today. I'm sure there are some other ones that I just forgot about, but all of these ones I just don't feel like I talk about enough, but I love all of them. Now, I would love to know if you've read any of these books, or if you're interested in reading any of them, or if you have a favorite that you feel is really underrated. I would love to hear about it in the comments. As always, thank you very much for hanging out with me today, and I will see you soon. Bye!